Welcome to Nollywood Radio France. Your host is Cyprian Johnson. You are listening to Nollywood Radio France. Your host is Cyprian Johnson. It's a challenge to run a free radio station like this one without money. So please support Nollywood Radio France. We need your financial support. For more information, go to our website www.nollywoodfrance.com. We thank Cyril Ibe for the permission to use this audio file from the Afriscope Radio Archives.
Welcome to the second half of Afriscope. I'm Cyril Ibe. We'll continue our conversation with biographer Eze Nwaheto on his subject, novelist Chinua Achebe, author of Things Fall Apart. Professor Nwaheto will help us explore the characters in the novel. From your understanding of Things Fall Apart, does Chinua Achebe succeed in providing a clear picture of the Igbo society? Does a reader go away with a clear perception of what is at work?
Well, I think he presents a distinct picture of the Igbo society, with all its norms and mores, with all its customs. And, with even looking at the family itself. He gave us an insight into the family of Okonkwo. He gave us an insight into the minds of his children. We have an insight too into some of the women there, the wives, and of course the very strong woman, Chielo, the priestess. We also have an insight into the way the people think of themselves, their perceptions of heroism, cowardice, their communal perception of themselves. The way that their lives were ordered, that even if one has a trivial case, the person could go to the highest lawmaking body of the land. This is what modern day culture is all about. That one could proceed from a local court and move to the Supreme Court, if necessary, to argue his case. But in this Igbo community, you didn't need any other advocate but yourself to do it. But of course, modern culture is different. Contemporary situations are quite different. And so, before one goes to the Supreme Court, maybe you need a lawyer who is of a particular status. But you see, this is what he presented. And now, after the conflict of culture, you discover that the missionary and the administrator, they said what they felt that somebody told them to say in their home countries. But they never made any effort to go and contact people in their home countries to confirm or deny anything, or to even advise them on what to do. These were decisions they simply took. But they claimed that they were acting in the interest of somebody much more powerful and perhaps more reasonable than all the people they had met. These are some of the things that he presented. That after that particular clash, or after the meeting of cultures, that things changed tremendously. It was no longer a question of looking at an individual. Looking at people as individuals and as human beings. They were being looked as a group on whose behalf that somebody thinks. That they were not meant to think for themselves. That was the tragedy.
Was the clash between the traditional Igbo society and Christianity in Things Fall Apart, was that inevitable?
Well, to the Igbo people, it was not inevitable because they have this accommodating spirit. But to the foreigners or to the people who came from other cultures, it was inevitable. They said that there shouldn't be any other God but their own. And that's what I meant by this perception of people and the way they look at themselves and the way they look at others. That was, to them, it was inevitable. To the Igbo, they were accommodating. Otherwise, the people wouldn't have settled down in the first place.
Do you see Okonkwo, the protagonist in Things Fall Apart, as the archetype of the Igbo society? What does it stand for or not stand for?
Well, people always assume that Okonkwo should be an embodiment of the Igbo culture. And there are some people, too, who have equally identified with him positively and others negatively. That rather than accepting a humiliation, that the best thing was for him to have killed himself. But you know that Okonkwo as a person is there, and then the Igbo culture is equally there. And it is through the proverbs of this Igbo culture that we sometimes get an insight into the way the people reason too. There is this statement in Arrow of God, which is Achebe's other novel, where it was said, "It is good to be brave, my son, but sometimes we stand in the compound of a coward to point at a spot where a brave man once lived." That was a statement from there. But then, I think that Okonkwo has several dimensions. There's Okonkwo who is presented realistically. There is Okonkwo who is presented metaphorically. There is Okonkwo who is presented symbolically. And this is why so many people could identify with Okonkwo as somebody who stood against this culture, ruling and perhaps crushing the things on its way. That's it. So Okonkwo has a number of characteristics that one could derive from the Igbo culture: the resilience, the diligence, the hard work, the determination. Okonkwo also has his own personal characteristics that not everybody in this culture, has in the same proportion. So I think you have a mixture, and you have several dimensions of him.
Why is Okonkwo's character so memorably affecting, if you will? People identify something about him.
Well, I think it is because, as I said, he incorporates so many dimensions. We find him as a son. We find him as a worker. We see him also as a father. We see him as a husband. We see him as an elder. We see him as a fighter. And we see him as both a cultural advocate and a cultural barometer in terms of his reactions to even the religious issues. These are the parts of him that appeal to people.
In the end, do Okonkwo's people, the people of Umuofia, do they abandon him and things fall apart?
Well, I don't think they really did, because if they did, they would have been jubilating that he died. But they felt that tragedy. You see, it was not just a loss of a human being, it was the loss of one of their greatest human beings. So it is not a question of abandoning him. The only thing was that Okonkwo has his own personal characteristics, and the people also had theirs. And before decisions are taken for that kind of situation, they would have, every opinion probably would have been consulted, and they probably would have said, okay, do we now decide to kill ourselves, by going at this force that doesn't seem to have any weak link? Or do we use our sagacity, our intelligence to circumvent an obstacle? That was at the stage at which they were. But Okonkwo felt, and definitely, as many people would agree with him, that rightly so, that they had waited long enough, and he wanted to move. You see, the story ended at the point of his tragedy. And what Obiorika said, I think, is what most of the people themselves said. This society has its laws, has its norms and morals. And that is why Obiorika got worked up at the end, and even told the man, this was one of the greatest men in Umuofia. You drove him to kill himself. You drove him to kill himself. Just as if the man went and killed himself. He was driven. And now, he will be buried like a dog. This was what he said. You see, that was part of what touched him most. The greatest man, one of the greatest men of the people, now going to be buried like a dog. In fact, to the Igbo people, the tragedy is not just in the death. Even in the manner of the death, even in the circumstances of the death, and even after the death. These were the things, that touched him. But I don't think they abandoned him. You see, his death was sudden. The only thing is that, Okonkwo, as we have been told in the book, was a man of action. Quick. And his decisions. Umuofia definitely would have come to a situation like that. But Okonkwo, being the person he is, and as I said, the sensitive barometer, he had to react first. And if no other person wanted to react at that time, he will react himself. And that is actually what leadership is all about.
So all in all, what qualities of Okonkwo's, what values did Okonkwo embody that were the same as his society's values?
Okonkwo embodied the value of hard work. Okonkwo embodied the value of achievements, definite achievements that could be assessed physically, achievements that could also be assessed socially, culturally, and intellectually. He embodied all those things. And at the same time, Okonkwo was a human being, an individual in his own right, respectful of the law. This is actually part of the tragedy. Respectful of the law and the mores and norms. This society respected laws. They had sanctions for everything. And that is why when the oracle said that certain things had to be done, even against his personal conviction, a personal will, Okonkwo had to do it, because he felt that if he failed to do it, that it will not be well for the community. I think those were the values. Those values were appreciated by his people. The value of heroism is appreciated by his people.
Ezenwo Heto is my guest on Afriscope, a radio journey through global Africa. He's the author of a new biography on his fellow Nigerian, Chinua Achebe, author of Things Fall Apart. Published back in 1958, the novel has sold more than 8 million copies worldwide. Give us your description of the Igbo people as presented by Achebe that you understand.
Well, the presentation of the Igbo people is not just done in Things Fall Apart. You also find that in Arrow of God, and perhaps in some other novels too, in one way or the other. The Igbo people are diligent, they are hardworking, they are industrious, they have great intellectual capacities. At the same time, their wisdom, their proverbs illustrate that these are people who value wisdom. They value their fellow human beings. And there was a little bit of the Republican nature there. I mean, not Republican in the sense of the nomenclatures that people use for political parties. I mean Republican in its human sense. The fact that they gave every individual an opportunity to excel. And of course, that they also saw every individual as part of a community.
Getting back to Achebe, in closing, he has a specific role that he thinks a writer in the African society should play. What is that role, and how is that role evolving or changing?
Well, at the beginning, it was a question of the African knowing about himself. That was one of those roles. It was also a question of others knowing about the African. That is basically the role Achebe has been playing. The role of an ambassador for literature and justice. He's now telling the world, you have to know about this literature from this part of the world. You have to know about the human dimensions of this literature. You have to know about the intricacies of human activities and actions. So those were actually part of the things that he tried to convey in his works.
Dr. Oheto, please summarize for us what Achebe's legacy is going to be at any point in time in history, 20 years down the road, 30 years, when people think of African literature and think of the man who wrote Things Fall Apart. What is the legacy that will never shift with time?
The legacy that will never shift is that Achebe made the world realize, become aware of African literature in a way that no other writer has ever done. Because he narrated a story that touched the basic human instincts: sympathy, love, resentment with injustice, ability to appreciate fellow human beings, ability to appreciate success. He also made people realize that in certain conflicts of any form, family, communal, village, national, or even international, that you have certain consequences that are not always envisaged. And most importantly, he told a human story. And I think it is that human story that will survive forever and ever. Because the skill with which he told that story is part of the success of that story.
Dr. Chinua Achebe is the biographer of Chinua Achebe, first known biography on Chinua Achebe of Nigeria. We thank you and appreciate you joining us and talking about a subject you have been studying for quite some time now.
Thank you.
Chinua Achebe teaches comparative literature at Alvan Ikoku College of Education in Owerri, Nigeria. His biography on Chinua Achebe is published by Indiana University Press in Bloomington, Indiana.
You are listening to Nollywood Radio France. Your host is Cyprian Johnson. It's a challenge to run a free radio station like this one without money. So please support Nollywood Radio France. We need your financial support. For more information, go to our website www.nollywoodfrance.com.